just want to thank you for coming over today, and just want you just to open up and just share with us why you decided to run for mayor.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and sorry I was a little late, as I too was stuck in traffic. I joked coming in, somebody's going to have to do something about this. I guess that's what I'm signing up for. I really ran for mayor for two reasons. These conversations go back about 18 months. I'd had the opportunity to be involved in a variety of business ventures in this city, but also as a part of my legal practice to represent the Music City Center, and to see kind of the business of metro government, to see that this was a hard, complicated $1.9 billion business. But it also gave me this appreciation just for the vitality of the city and the momentum and kind of where we find ourselves now. So as I began looking around 18 months ago, thinking, liking in general the momentum of the city and thinking that needed to continue, I really felt strongly about two things. First was that momentum piece, and not wanting to see us take a step back. And what I thought I heard from some others that at the time were running or talking about running, some of which did, some of which didn't, was a message that was, well, Nashville's had this unbelievable run the last 5 or 10 years, but now's maybe the time to step back and take a deep breath. For me, that wasn't a message I could sign up for. I understand that we have to do this in a fiscally responsible way. I understand that we have concerns about debt. I understand we have concerns about growth, and that being thoughtful growth. But I think of the city like I would think of Nova Copy where we are tonight. We're either moving forward or we're moving backwards. Status quo doesn't exist. But the equally compelling reason, the second part of that was there's a real misunderstanding in some places where we all begin to feel from time to time that all that momentum, that all that economic opportunity, and that all that prosperity is being felt all over the city and all over the county. And in many respects, that's just not true. I mean, you go 2.5 miles from where we sit tonight to North Nashville, or you go 3.5 miles out Nolensville Road, and in many respects, you can feel like you're 50 or 60 miles away. Or you spend time in Antioch or Donaldson or Bellevue or pick the community. And what you hear is we see all this enormous investment going into downtown. And investment being not just money and investment, but investment being our energy and our resources and our time and our commitment and our priorities. And we like that, but either how do we benefit from that or when it's our turn? So to answer your question, what really got me into this was thinking that the next mayor needed to say that we would be bold enough to sustain the momentum of the city, but responsible enough to begin to diversify that prosperity.
One more question before we move to one of the team questions, and then we're going to move to the audience and allow them to ask some questions. But the question that was sent to me was, people say it takes a village. What do you think when you hear that? And who's in the village?
Well, I think all of us are in the village, or all of us need to be in the village. I guess when I think about that, I think about what's happening in our schools. When you pull back and look at it, and I mentioned this to you earlier this morning, you know, those children are in that classroom. We hear all this about education, the importance of what's happening in the school system, which is absolutely correct. But when you really look at it, those children are only in that classroom or in that school 8 hours a day, 180 days a year. Most of us know from our own personal experiences that what's happening in that other 80% of a child's life has just as much impact on what's happening in the classroom. In that classroom, you've got 73% of our children that are coming that qualify for free and reduced lunch, meaning that they're in poverty. You've got 2,900 of our students in the metro school system which are homeless, even in some of the nicer, most affluent neighborhoods. And so when I really step back and think about that, we can no longer leave this to the exclusive responsibility of that teacher, of that principal, of the school system, or even the school board or the new school director. That has to be all of our responsibility in the day. If we're going to say at the end of the day that we're going to work to reduce poverty in this city, that we're going to work to give some of these children a ticket out, we can't get there by just thinking in a vacuum about our school system, or just thinking in a vacuum about what's happening after school, or just thinking about what's happening on weekends, or just worrying about transportation. To that respect, when Mayor Dean ran 8 years ago, he said all these things are connected, and that's just as true today as it ever was then. And so I think it's that combination of saying, as we think about children, we have to think about not just the totality of a child's life, thinking about the 24 hours, but also thinking about a spectrum that begins well before a child ever steps foot in a kindergarten classroom and extends well beyond the cap and gown ceremony from high school graduation.
Great, thank you. Again, this is Table Talk live online on Periscope, and it'll also be shown on Google. And we just thank you for joining us here on site and then online. So now I'm going to move to our youth that's with us. And sometimes when we get in these forums and we're at the table, we forget about the young people. We don't invite them to the table. And so I wanted her to come and ask us some questions that came from youth. And just introduce yourself and then tell me your question.
Hello everybody, my name is Pearson Briggs. I'm a recent graduate of St. Cecilia Academy, and I'm a rising freshman at Spelman College in Atlanta. Thank you for having me again. Candidate Bone, a lot of my peers sent me questions, and we're just kind of thinking of what we can ask you.
Trick question.
What we can ask you that will kind of help us gauge who you are as a candidate for mayor. So, something that we were wondering is, what issues do you feel are not getting enough attention, and how can you bring light to those issues, and how can you change them?
Sure. Well, I think there are two issues in this city that are not getting enough attention. One is infrastructure, which is probably less important to somebody that's in high school or headed to college. But I think the other is kind of picking up off of It Takes a Village, is what's happening in our after and out of school programming in the city. And you're a head to college, rising freshman, you've seen this firsthand. It looks to me that we've got some great programs in this city, starting with NASA, which is happening under the umbrella of the library and the parks, starting with a lot of our nonprofit communities, a lot of church programs, etc., that are providing effective after and out of school programming. Back to the example about teachers and principals in the 20% of a child's life. The school system gets to work from the inside of that school out. Well, the mayor and the community, I think, get the opportunity to come along and work from the outside in and to begin to say, what keeps me up at night? There's a lot of questions about infrastructure. There's a lot of questions about our debt, what happens on transit. Our history in Nashville shows or says that we'll figure those out. Right? Those solutions are within reach. What keeps me up is worrying about those children between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 8 o'clock the next morning. What's happening between Friday afternoon and Monday morning? What's happening during the summers? We have children today in this city that were babysat all day long by an iPad or a TV. And so I think if you really pull it back and look at it, as I inventory it, it looks to me that we have effective after and out of school programming for maybe 8% of the kids that are most in need. And I think the opportunity going forward, the issue that does not get enough attention, is to say, how do we scale what's already in place? And I'll be the first one to acknowledge these don't have to be government programs. It has to be taking those programs, and we can name 36 organizations that are doing great work in the schools and around the schools and in the afternoons and helping kids and families. And I think our opportunity is to come back and say, how do we double it? How do we triple it? How do we quadruple it?
Great. So I'm going to take a question. I'm looking at someone in the audience that I know, and I know she has a great question. So, Sharika, do you have a question for the mayoral candidate, Robert Charles Bone?
I probably have a couple. Well, I'll do one now. I'm a reverse commuter. I live in Davidson County, and I work in Murray County, work at Columbia State Community College. And so I am concerned about transit, both within the city and regionally. Do you have any ideas about how to tackle regional transit? For example, my husband actually works downtown. We can leave home at the same time, and I'll get to Columbia before he can get to downtown Nashville. It's an hour and 5 minute drive for me. Do you have any ideas about what we can do to
I do. Thank you for your question. And what your question and your experience underscores is one of the statistics that I think a lot about. If you take the 10-county region, however we define that, 54% of our workforce lives in another county in which they work. So even if we could just wave a magic wand and solve the Davidson County piece of this, we would have solved less than half of our overall issue. So I think this has to be attacked in two ways. One is we cannot lose sight of a regional mass transit, high capacity, high volume system. I'm more of an optimist. I don't believe we're starting at ground zero in that. I give Mayor Dean a lot of credit for putting this mayor's regional caucus together. where they're tackling regional issues, not just transit, but transit is the number one issue. And as I sit in on their meetings, while they may not be unanimous, there's a lot of consensus within the leadership of the region about what a long-term regional mass transit system can and should look like. The next piece of that is trying to figure out what does dedicated funding look like, and how do you partner with the state and or the federal government. This is not going to happen overnight. The frustration for a lot of us is we have a generation coming up, everything is on demand, they want it fixed tomorrow. We're going to have to continue to be patient with this. We've got issues that have to be resolved at the federal level and the state level, but I'm optimistic that over the next mayoral administration, you will see ground broken on a regional plan. Now, having said that, as we can't afford just to wait on the regional plan to say, well, we can't do anything until then. And so I think as an immediate first step, we got to do all we can to make our current bus system in the county as efficient and as dependable as possible. As I've been trying to ride the bus where I live on the backside of West Nashville, almost to Bellevue, I walk from my house to the bus stop, which is 9/10 of a mile. It takes me 19 minutes. There's no sidewalks between my house and there. The bus ride in is the easy part. It's 30 minutes in, but my experience is it's harder for me to get to the bus than to ride the bus. And when you look at, I look at three statistics on that. One is we'll have 10 million passenger rides this year on MTA, but we're only at 15% capacity. If we could figure out how to double that from 15% to 30%, which doesn't seem that unreasonable, you would see an overnight change in traffic and congestion in the city. And in part the way we double it is, our choice rider in that system currently, meaning they have other options to choose from but are choosing to ride the bus, is only 32% of the overall ridership. And then you look at the fact that 85% of us walk to the bus. To be honest, I don't know, I'm not smart enough at this point to tell you, well, does 85% need to be 100% or should it be 70%? But we'll have an app by the end of the year which will begin to make this a little more efficient, a little more dependent, a little more reliable. We have an emerging generation, there's a generational change thought process of who's willing to ride the bus that's coming up, that's either children that are getting of driving age that would just as soon avail themselves of public transit. We also have new people moving to the city that would just as soon rely on that. So we're going to have some advantages, we're going to have some things we can take advantage of without question. But we got to make back to that on-demand younger generation, and all of us, right? We all use our phones, we all use our iPhones. You're going to order something, you click on it, and it's done. I mean, one of my children had ordered something off Amazon and wanted to know if it was going to be here this afternoon. Right? I mean that's the mindset that we have. Right, but I think now we have this opportunity to say we got to design transit around that. So a regional plan is without question important and has to be the number one thing we do regionally over the next 4 to 8 years. And we got to continue to build on some of that success and momentum that we have. But in the interim, we can't lose sight of doing everything we can to make the current system as efficient and dependable as possible.
Thank you. That was great. One of the things for me is entrepreneurship and small business. And what are your thoughts on small business and young entrepreneurs and their impact on Nashville's economy? And how do you feel the mayor's office can help with it?
Yeah. So, I think the number one way the mayor's office helps is that we create an environment and an ecosystem that not only attracts people to want to be a part of what's happening in Nashville, but also opens the minds to younger folks that says, you don't have to just go work for somebody else. That's fine, but look and consider starting your own business. And so obviously what they're doing at the Entrepreneur Center, I think, is a great model. And they're talking about expanding that. Just in the last couple of months, they've talked about doing a kind of what they call a drop-down, a music accelerator focused on the music business. I want to see one done in this city that's focused on DPE and minority businesses. We don't do enough around that, and it is helping people with business plans, it's exposing them to other contacts, and it's also helping with financing. And so one of the things we've talked about in this campaign is over the next 4 years, could we create 1,000 new minority businesses in Nashville? That'd be 250 a year. It seems like an audacious goal, and to me it does. I push back on some people I was visiting this with. They said, well, are you going to step up or not? And so as I began to think about it, could we create one new minority business in this city every working day over the next 4 years? I think that's something we could probably do. So I think that has to continue to be a major focus, because we know 70% of the businesses in the region have 9 employees or less. And I think that has to be just as important a piece of our economic development strategy as relocating and recruiting new Fortune 500 companies to Nashville. But in Nashville, we don't have to do one or the other. We get to choose to do both. But what we have to be able to do is help those small businesses and those entrepreneurs not only do business with the metropolitan government, so that when we do procurement, that has a transformative impact and effect, but also begin to lead the way to show, well, how could you also do business with HCA or Nissan, and try to keep as much of that spending local as possible and put a major effort and emphasis on that.
Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm going to be knocking on the mayor's door when the time comes. I'll be coming to see you. And so we thank you again, those that are watching from Periscope and those that are watching from Google Live. And we're here tonight with Mayoral candidate Charles Robert Bone. I keep saying Charles Bone. I know his dad for years. I've known him for a while. And so if I say that, you know I'm still talking about you. Okay. So I'm going to move now back to another youth question, because I want to really make sure that they get some of those questions answered that they have.
Something that is important to me is homelessness. I volunteer at the Bridge Ministry, and time and time again you just see families of homeless people, and it breaks my heart. So there are over 2,000 homeless people in the Nashville community. If elected, what would be your strategy to not only help those people get off of the streets, but also help them find jobs or careers that will better impact the quality of their life?
I think that's a great question, and I spent some time last week at the rescue mission just talking about what they're doing, et cetera, and I've seen this from a couple of different angles. I think the thing that amazes me is we can get 4 or 5 experts from the homelessness community in a room and say, well, how many homeless people do we have in Nashville? And you get a different answer from what you get. I mean, I've asked the question, I've heard it. 1,000, 2,900, 4,000, 7,900, 10,000, right? And we can gauge it from several different ways and several different points in time. When you look at that compared to some other cities, it's not totally out of the line. But what is out of the line is in proportion to the generosity and the prosperity that we already have in Nashville. And so what I really want to do is, similar back to my vision for the school system, is saying this can't be, our children can't be the exclusive responsibility of the school system. I don't think curing homelessness can be the exclusive responsibility of the Homeless Commission, or the Bridge Ministry, or the Rescue Mission, Safe Haven, etc. I think what we have to do is peel that back and invite all these groups to the table. We've got the world's greatest nonprofit community in Nashville, 2,000 nonprofits in the Middle Tennessee area with an aggregate budget of $9.4 billion. We have an education community, a colleges and university system that for a city of Nashville size is second to none, and with leadership that is not apathetic about the future of Nashville. And we have a faith-based community of 700 churches. Literally, most of them asking, what can we do to help? My preacher asks me all the time, as a congregation, what can we do to help? I'd like to see us kind of pull back and invite all those groups to the table and talk specifically about education, about homelessness, about poverty, about domestic violence. There's a jobs application, there's a transportation application, to say let's all get on the same page about what are the outcomes that we want to achieve over the next 4 years, right? We can't just measure activities. We can't just measure how many homeless beds we have in this city, but we have to measure how many people we get out of homelessness. And all the research currently shows that I read says housing first is probably the right model. I don't have any way to dispute that. What I assume is that's right. We got to get people in housing and then talk about how we connect them into the workforce. And I think that's probably the next piece of that, along with counseling, with mental illness, drugs, and alcohol, etc. But when I think about it, when you think about our workforce development strategy as a city, I think what we have to say is not only making sure that we're tying in young people to that, I think we have to think about how do we tie in the homelessness part of that community and those that are leaving incarceration, right? Can we be bold enough to say hiring homelessness people and hiring people coming out of prison is part of our workforce development strategy as a city? To me, it seems like not just the right thing to do, but also seems like it would be good business sense, right? Because it's going to save us in the long term.
Do you have any other question for me?
Nashville is called the IT City, yet last year there was nearly 73% of students at Metro schools who were economically devastated. How would you make sure that everyone is benefiting from all of the new developments and opportunities that are making Nashville so popular?
I appreciate the question, and that really is the focus of why I chose to run, to figure out how we diversify that prosperity. We're not going to do another $1 billion worth of investment in downtown Nashville the next 4 or 8 years. May not do it again in Union's lifetime. But what we've been left with is a set of proprietary investments that now we ought to be able to leverage as a city and to produce dividends that allow us to invest in other parts of the city, other parts of the county, and in programs that we all benefit from. So just as an example, this year we will attract 13 million visitors to the city that will spend $5.4 billion, which is up from 11 million visitors 2 years ago. I think where we're headed, as long as we manage this appropriately, is 15, 16, 17 million visitors that aren't spending $5 billion, but are spending $7 or $8 billion. The sales tax growth, it's good for economic development, it's good for economic impact, but the sales tax growth on that doesn't just go to the state, doesn't just go back to pay back bonds. At a minimum, 2.25% of that comes back to the general fund. So where I want to get to, this year we'll collect about $360 million worth of sales tax. The growth of that is being driven by those visiting the city, not those that live here. And so with that 360, I like to call the line at 360. And as 360 becomes 375, 400, 500, 600 million, to show people how and where that money is being reinvested. So that the next time we lay a mile's worth of sidewalks on Lebanon Road in Donaldson, or on Hillsborough Road in Green Hills, or we build a community center in Madison, or we buy or purchase a new park in the southeast part of town, which we're in the process of doing, or we invest in an ELL program to the schools, or we pay teachers more, we pay down some of our debt early, or we help invest in our community enhancement grants so that we can do more with the nonprofits that are doing really good work in this. Everybody, you have to be able to see where that money is being reinvested, because you have to have just as much at stake, regardless of where you live, in the success and the vitality and the vibrancy of downtown as those who live and work downtown. That was the deal that was made, I thought, over the last decade, saying, as we build these amenities and investments and capital projects, one, they're going to be paid for people that are visiting the city, without question that's happening, and two, at some point, that's going to allow us a mechanism to do some other things with. And I think we're there. And I think as we turn the page, I think we're essentially there where we can begin to see it. But we have to be able to say that all this development, all this growth, moving Bridgestone to downtown is a means to what end? It can't just be a means to more means. And it can't be just staying on that hamster wheel and just doing more and more because it's so exciting. The next time we decide we're going to build a 30-story headquarters for Bridgestone downtown, we need to be doing that not because that's another building in the skyline of Nashville or another trophy on the wall of the Chamber of Commerce. We need to say, is this a legitimate means? Is this going to produce revenue that allows us to invest in education, allows us to invest in transportation, allows us to invest in infrastructure, affordable housing, etc. And can we show people where we're doing that all over the city, all over the county? So I think that's where we're here. I think that's where we are now as a city, but I also think we get the opportunity to talk about that in a slightly different way and to show people how we're measuring that.
Do you see any questions on Periscope that have come in? They're loving it. Good, good.
Hearts are a good thing?
Hearts are a good thing. Anybody
What
else
would be
from...
the bad? Is there a
Right.
opposite heart?
No hearts.
Thumbs down?
Does anybody else have questions in the audience? Go ahead.
Should I say?
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Teresa Baker-Bell. I work for Microsoft, and I've only been in Nashville since 5 years. I was recruited by Microsoft and then asked to move to Nashville. Very reluctant. And even when they sent me here, I thought, you gotta be kidding. But part of my reluctancy was I didn't see a lot of minority professionals. So I want to know, what are you doing? Are you partnering with any organizations? What are you doing to help recruit more minorities that are top talent to the city?
And you said, what is he doing? And he's not in office yet, but I'm claiming that he's there. So what are you doing?
What would be next?
Well, I can tell you what I've been doing before now. I think if you look at our law firm, we're probably the most diverse professional services firm, certainly in the city, if not in the state or the Southeast. And we got that way by being intentional. And we got that way by recruiting, not necessarily just taking in resumes. We got that way by saying we want it to be diverse. We want it to look like the city in which we existed, and we want it to look like the clients that we serve. And you've seen a lot. I think the role for the mayor is twofold. One is our own house, and we had a study from the Metro Human Rights Commission that was released earlier this year that says 44 of our 50 department heads are white. That doesn't seem like the right percentage. And probably more staggering is in the top 3 pay classifications in Metro, 84% of those are white. And so I think as a city, we have to do a better job of leading that and saying that we're going to do all we can to recruit, develop, and promote diverse talent. And a piece of that is African American, but it's not totally African American. We now live in a very diverse city. We've got 20% of our student population is Hispanic or Latino, but our teachers are 1%. Right? We've got the same issues in the police department, but it also extends to the professional class. I think the second thing is, as a city, making sure we're doing all we can to be a place that not only attracts African American and diverse professional talent, but also the colleges and universities that we have here, from TSU to Fisk to Mayoral and others, is being a place that as students come to this city to go to school, where they want to stay. And so we've got a lot more work to do on that. We're now to the place where we're beginning to acknowledge that we should say the right things and think about things, but we now have to take that 2 or 3 or 4 steps forward. And it connects in so many different ways. I mean, transportation is a component of that. Affordable housing is a component of that. Our economic development strategy is a piece of that. But it's all across the board. But we also have to show that Nashville is a place where you can have mobility, where people can move in and also move up. And so I think it starts with saying, what does our own workforce look like, not just in the mayor's office, but throughout the metro department, throughout the metro government, but also as a city, setting that tone and setting that expectation.
Great question. Any other questions from the audience? No other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Mayor Purcell and Mayor Dean continued the offices of neighborhoods and children and youth, and I had the pleasure of working for the Office of Children and Youth for Mayor Purcell. But those offices were really good at connecting the community and citizens to the mayor's office and giving them a direct line of communication with what the mayor's office was doing. Have you had any thought about how you would structure your office, and would it include offices that would provide citizens the opportunity to connect with you?
Yes and yes. When I look at the form of the metro government is fantastic, right? And for our forefathers to have set the metro government in place 50 plus years ago, we get enormous benefit from. But when you look at the way we're organized, it looks to me that the org chart of the mayor's office and the metro government is set up to respond to issues and priorities and constituencies of 25 years ago. And that when we have a new office like the Mayor's Office of New Americans or our Office of Innovation, we think, where can we fit this in the budget? And that's where it goes on the org chart. What I'd like to see us come back and do is, currently the Mayor's Office, the last couple of cycles, has had 1 deputy mayor. That's an appointed, hired position. I'd like to see us come back and have 4 deputy mayors, for example. And you'd have 1 that was focused on education and children and family issues, 1 focused on transportation, 1 on economic development and tourism and public works, 1 focused on public safety. And so maybe we mix those up, and maybe there's some different designations, and maybe there's 3 instead of 4, but certainly the first one that I always talk about is somebody, a point person for education, children, and family issues. But then those organizations and those departments and those agencies that have anything to do with that line up kind of in that vertical. And that way that deputy mayor, and with the mayor, but that deputy mayor can have regular meetings, not just a department head meeting once a quarter or once every 6 months. Then you've got departments and agencies that have to talk to each other that are on the same page. What I see all over the metro government, and I've seen this from my work on behalf of them and my work adversarial to them, is we don't do a good job of communicating amongst departments and agencies. And a lot of it is not nefarious. A lot of it is not a turf war. It's just we're not set up to talk to each other. On the development side, we moved all these offices to Howard School Building, and that's helpful because they can at least now walk down the hall. They're at least in the same building, but we've still not set them up to communicate with each other. So to your 2 questions, the first is I've given a lot of thought as to how to organize it and hope to kind of streamline the communication process. The second piece of that, when you think about the mayor's office of neighborhoods, children issues, et cetera, our youth council, the youth master plan, all that, we know, given what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, in the last couple of months with the pushback on some of the capital projects, that we've got to do a better job of reaching out into the community. Not just having a point of contact where people can come and they know who to call, but actually people that wake up in the morning thinking, how do we engage the community? How do we reach out? And I know it's easier said than done. I mean, I fully embrace that and fully understand that in many regards that others think they've done a good job, but to the extent that people still feel like that they've not been communicated with or talked with, and those are great ways to reach out deep into the community. So I've got a lot of respect for what Dean and Purcell have done. They've had different approaches. Mine would be different from theirs, but my style would be somewhere probably in between theirs. But I've tried to reorganize that in office in a way that was probably more responsive to where we are now as a city.
Great. These have been some great questions. And again, this is Table Talk Q&A with mayoral candidate Charles Robert Bone. And we're live on Periscope and on Google. And do we have any questions coming in from Periscope? They're just loving us. We'll take that. We'll take it. More hearts. I'm a Nashville native. I've grown up here. I've gone to school here. I've traveled internationally, and I've come back home. And I've sat at many tables where we talked about different educational strategies, different business strategies, and what we come up with plans, and we implement some of the things on the plan. But I don't see us coming back as a community and saying those things that we implemented, were they successful? What was the outcome? What do we need to tweak? So tell me how your approach would be different.
And that's where you take just our Office of Technology, right? I mean, we view data in this city as something that's supposed to be gathered, collected, and stored. Only now we're beginning to think about, well, we have billions of data points that impact public safety, impact education, impact traffic, impact building permits. It's all over the city. And we've got a lot of cities that we see on the cutting edge. Stephen Goldsmith, who used to be the mayor of Indianapolis and was a deputy mayor under Bloomberg in New York, has written this amazing book about how cities need to be using data and how they were doing it. So I'd like to see us come back. And all these strategic plans are important. All these initiatives are important. But I want to get us aligned as a city on some very specific outcomes that we want to achieve. 8, 10, 12, and a bunch of different areas. And that's not to say that as a city we won't pursue other initiatives, but as an entrepreneur and a businesswoman, my church, a nonprofit, everybody needs to understand that as a city, we're trying to move ACT scores from 18.3 to 19.5, or we're trying to cut our homeless population from 10,000 to 4,000, or making sure that we don't have any veteran or child that's homeless, but to come up with what those specific things are and use our data in real time to measure that so you can get on a website at any point in time and say, how are we doing, right? And back to the transit thing. You know, if we say a goal is we want to go from 15% capacity to 30% capacity, people need to understand. I think you're more inclined to ride the bus if you're a choice rider, if you think I'm making a difference. I'm doing something that's helpful to the city. So I think we have to align ourselves. And I'll be completely honest. I think this is leadership. Somebody might criticize for me. I'm kind of agnostic as to what some of those goals are. I mean, I'm not agnostic about the vision I see for Nashville, but if we get all those groups in the room and they say, it doesn't need to be ACT scores, it needs to be third grade literacy or TCAP scores here, I'm happy to get on that. Or if it needs to be, instead of going from 18.3 to 19.5, it needs to be 20 or 19. I just want us aligned around a certain set of objectives and outcomes that we know move the needle in the city, and so that we can articulate why that's important.
One of the things, I've been meeting with some data scientists, and some of the stuff they're saying, I don't know what they're saying, but I see that they can take all of that. And I said, if I can purchase some on Amazon, and I can go to Facebook and I can see what I was looking at, we should be able to figure out, by gathering all that data, where we need to go next, what's working and what's not working.
You can do that with Microsoft.
We got a Microsoft person. I think they're going to give you a bonus for that. I think you're going to get a bonus from Microsoft for that one. I forgot Therese was in the room.
Look no further.
Look no further, Microsoft. And so I think the biggest thing for me is that when we sit at the table, whether it's my church, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a for-profit business, that when we come up with the outcomes, that we're measuring them and we're coming back and saying, well, how are we successful? Did we see the needle move? If we didn't, let's tweak it and don't just continue to do things over and over and over again with no results and think we're going to get better. And so I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. And I want to give you an opportunity, if there's some undecided people that's watching us that are not sure who they're going to vote for, I want you to just share with us why you feel that you're going to be the best candidate for Nashville in this season.
I think the two things I have to offer are experience and perspective. On the experience side, I have been a business person. I've been involved in startups from the manufacturing to healthcare to a couple of restaurants and other things, and know what it's like to start, to run, and to grow a small business, and understand that the city and the government shouldn't take the creation of jobs by business for granted. We ought to make that easier, not harder. At the same time, my experience with the Music City Center gave me an insight into the business of Metro government to see that that's a hard, complicated 1.9, now almost $2 billion business that doesn't just run itself. In fact, decisions are made there all day, every day that have a tremendous impact on our lives individually, our families, our businesses, our business climate, and the quality of life. I also bring to the table that I'm a father of four. I have 4 children, ages 13, 12, 8, and 1 that turned 6 this week. And I have the ability to see this city not just through their eyes, but also the community that I want them to be a part of 50 years from now. But from the perspective, I think we're at an interesting place, an interesting crossroad in Nashville. I think as we begin to turn the page, the next 4 to 8 years look different. And they look a little different. I've got great respect for where we are now as a city and how we got here. But we now get the opportunity to recalibrate our priorities. And as we recalibrate those priorities, I think we have to understand that our 353 kindergarten teachers in this city are just as important as the cranes, 16 cranes probably between here and the other side of downtown, that are failing, that repairing our failing water and sewer lines, many of which are more than 40 years old, some of which are more than 125 years old, is just as important as the success of the 2-year-old Music City Center. That helping those 70% of our businesses with 9 employees or less is just as important as recruiting new business to town. That the strength and the history and the vibrancy of our neighborhoods is just as important as the vibrant downtown. And probably most importantly to this discussion, that the 40% of our single mothers living in poverty are just as important to the success and the future of Nashville as our business leaders, our entrepreneurs, and our bankers. So I think Nashville's a great city, without question. As I confessed earlier, I'm an optimist. I think we're a great city. But I don't think that's guaranteed tomorrow. We've got challenges, most of which we've discussed this evening, but I think with respect to most of those challenges, the solutions to those are within reach. So certainly if you agree with me that Nashville's a great city and that the solutions to a lot of those challenges are within reach, if we can get on the same page about what consensus looks like and what those common objectives and outcomes look like, then I'd ask you to partner with me not just over the next 3 weeks of this election, but over the next 4 years to ensure that Nashville remains a great city. So I'm Charles Robert Bone. I would appreciate your vote, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you so much for joining us. So thank you guys that joined us live streaming on Periscope and on Google. And if you have any other questions, you can reach me at YE Shields. My initials is yes. So yes. And or you can find me on Facebook, and you can also follow Charles Robert Bone on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. Have a good night.